Chapter 1059. In just half a month, Yang Fu had changed a lot. Every day, he would take the initiative to complete his homework. When he saw trash on the ground, he would bend over to pick it up and place it in the trash can. When it rained, he would help the people living on the street to collect the clothes that had not been collected in time. Helping the elderly cross the road was a common occurrence for him. In fact, Li Yi did not have strict requirements for him. Compared with Li Han, Yang Fu's life was simply too happy. He only needed to complete the homework that old Wang gave him, and then do 10 good deeds every day. He needed to do 10 good deeds every day to ensure that he would have food to eat the next day. If he did 10 good deeds, he would eat vegetables and rice. If he did not do 10 good deeds, he could only choose to eat soil or tree bark. Only by exceeding the minimum standards set by Li Yi could he have the right to eat meat. Of course, he also had other choices. Eating tree bark in the village was an act of vandalism. Once he was caught by the law enforcement team, he would be grounded. Being grounded would give him steamed buns, which was better than eating tree bark and soil. However, Yang Fu had not thought of this yet. Habit was a terrible thing. Whether he was willing or not, even if he pretended to do all these good deeds, as long as he could keep pretending, he would be worthy of the title of Top 10 Young Men of Willow Village. The name of the village, Li Yi, followed the name of Willow Village in Qing and Prefecture. It was also in the mountains, and they also had the blood of bandits. It would more or less make Rui and the others feel a little bit like home. Yang Fu was the new, top 10 young men of Willow Village. It was not easy to get this title. The children in the village were all full of energy, or maybe their parents were full of energy. To get this title, Yang Fu had to exceed or double the task that Li Yi gave him. Whether he did it for King Jing's face or to not starve, at least on the surface, he was not as naughty as before. Yang Fu did not know when his sense of superiority disappeared. He could play glass beads with Fat Tiger and the others, fan pictures, and compete on the mountain to see who could pee further. Of course, he was usually the one who lost, especially in the last round. After the competition, he looked very sad, as if his self-esteem had suffered a great blow. Yang Liuqing and Prime Minister Wang noticed Yang Fu's change. Elder Wang looked at Yang Fu, who was picking up the trash on the ground and throwing it into the trash can. He sighed and said, "I've been teaching for my entire life and nurturing people for my entire life, but I'm still not as thorough as a young man." Yang Liuqing comforted him. Even the Tuangu from the Qi Kingdom, who is well versed in Confucian classics and has students all over the world, has lost to Uncle Master. This snowfall was very heavy and fast. The ground was soon covered with a thin layer of snow. However, if she wanted to build a snowman and have a snowball fight, she would have to wait until tomorrow at the very least. After this snowfall, the new year was approaching. Time was about to enter the second year of Jingping, the capital. On the 23rd of the 12th month, when Li Xian walked out of his room, he discovered that a heavy snow had silently fallen last night. Hibiscus Garden's hair had turned white overnight. Soon, it would be another year's court conference. However, as the emperor, he wasn't that busy. It was good to have Mingzu in court. If he had to handle all these things alone, he would definitely be flustered. He wouldn't be able to attend to the matters of the Academy of Sciences. However, it was impossible for Mingzu to help him forever. Ever since she started to limit the number of memorials submitted by the various departments of the court and gradually reduced it. Now, it had become one every 3 days unless it was an emergency. At that time, he knew that she would have to leave sooner or later. He couldn't blame Mingzu. In fact, he felt that he was a little selfish. If it wasn't for the restraints of the court, she might still be having fun with Li Yi. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that he had really let her down. In the morning, a thick layer of snow had fallen in Hibiscus Garden. There were guards patrolling the palace from morning till night. The ground had been trampled out of shape. It was a little disappointing. He walked through the long corridor alone and headed in the direction of the Imperial Garden. There were many Imperial Gardens in the capital. Besides the Imperial Palace, there were also Hibiscus Garden and Sujiang Garden. Comparatively speaking, Hibiscus Garden's garden was the largest and the most beautiful. Everyone in the capital knew that the plum blossoms in Cold Mountain Temple were unique. Every year, countless people would go to see them. However, only a few people knew that the plum forest in Hibiscus Garden was not inferior to the plum blossoms in Cold Mountain Temple. It was just that other than a few members of the imperial family, no one else could enjoy the scenery in the garden. Leaving the first set of footprints in the snow-covered, spotless garden was something that gave him a sense of accomplishment. Li Xian walked to the entrance of the garden. When he saw that there was already a line of footprints extending into the garden, he immediately felt depressed. He walked into the plum forest and followed the footprints. When he saw the figure standing under the largest plum tree in the garden, the depression in his heart was swept away. He slowly walked over and softly asked, "Why did you wake up so early?" The girl was wearing a white robe. When she heard the voice, she turned her head and smiled. She said, "I woke up early. I couldn't sleep, so I got up and took a walk." Li Xian looked up and saw a red ribbon tied to a plum tree branch. Shanning would come here every day to tie a red ribbon. Now, there were hundreds of red ribbons. From afar, the ribbons on the plum tree danced in the wind, adding some embellishment to the white world. It was the most unique scenery in this plum forest. He looked at the girl's elegant smile and thought to himself, "What a heartless fellow. He actually made me wait for so long in the capital and didn't even know to come back." He only had a vague idea of what he had done to Shuzhou. He also heard that he had conquered the entire land of chaos. Such an interesting thing, but he couldn't participate in it personally. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, "After the imperial court meeting, your sister and I plan to go to Shuzhou." We are going to patrol incognito. Does Shanning want to go with us?" The girl was startled. She suddenly raised her head and her face blushed. Her voice trembled as she said, Shuzhou." Li Xian nodded. I have to go back and ask mother." The girl's face instantly turned red and she quickly ran out of the garden. She ran in such a hurry that she didn't pay attention to her feet and accidentally tripped. Li Xian hurriedly went forward to help her up. However, the girl had already gotten up on her own. She didn't even have time to brush off the snow on her body. She staggered and jogged outside. When her figure completely disappeared, Li Xian sighed and said leisurely, "It's time to do an incognito visit. I'll accompany you to take a look in the afternoon." Yan Fei touched her hair and said, "Tell me, what's the matter? Why did you come back in such a hurry?" The girl lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Brother and sister are going to Shuzhou. They are going to patrol in disguise. Go if you want to." Concubine Yan patted her head and said with a smile, "But, no buts." Concubine Yan shook her head and said, "The capital is so small. I have to go out and see more scenery and meet the people I want to meet. Then I'll make arrangements for the academy and the association first." The girl hurriedly lifted the blanket and jumped off the bed. She put on her shoes and quickly disappeared into the small building. Concubine Yan leaned against the window and watched as the figure hurriedly ran into the snow and quickly disappeared. She picked up the scroll again and thought for a moment. Then, she picked up the brush and added a few words at the back before putting the scroll down. She opened the window, and the wind blew in from outside, blowing the scroll she had placed in front of the window. The cover of the book was blown open, revealing a few small and graceful words. Mandarin duck handkerchief, the cold wind swept in a few snowflakes. She stretched out a hand, and a snowflake landed on her palm. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and she slowly clenched her fist. The snowflakes melted, but she seemed to be clenching something tightly. In the Jiang of Silla residence, Li Yi tightened his clothes. It was already past the new year, but the weather was getting colder and colder. The gray sky with snowflakes made it hard for people to breathe, as if their hearts were being clenched tightly. He was so envious of Rui and Rui. When could he be like them and not be affected by the cold and heat? He walked outside and saw Yang Fu playing a role-playing game with Fat Tiger and the others. The current Yang Fu no longer had the airs of a prince and could already mingle with them. Fat Tiger looked at Yang Fu, who was lying on the ground, and laughed loudly. "Ha, monkey son, no matter how powerful you are, you can't escape from the palms of Buddha Gautama." Yang Fu's face was filled with grief and indignation as he shouted, "Jade Emperor, Gautama, I, old son, was deceived by you. I was deceived by you." There were brothels in the village that didn't charge money. They would go to the theater when they had time, and their favorite was Journey to the West. To children, this show would never go out of style. Even the 3-year-old Li Duan could watch it with relish. Over the past few months, he no longer had many restrictions on Yang Fu. A leopard could not change its spots. Li Yi couldn't guarantee that Yang Fu had turned over a new leaf and awakened some strange overlord attribute that could make the people submit to him with a stomp of his feet, make the emperor of the Wu kingdom bow down to him, give up the throne, and cut off his own head. However, his arrogant and willful personality was nowhere to be seen, and he was no longer as annoying as before. Li Yi felt that his mission had been completed, and he could report to Yang Liuqing now. This period of time could be considered the most stable period of his life in Shuzhou. The various reforms in Shuzhou had passed the most difficult stage, and what followed was a long period of development. With Chen Chong keeping an eye on everything, there wouldn't be any problems. The Land of Chaos had also officially changed its surname to Lu, and it was also in a stable stage of development. Wang Wei was leading a group of people to roll up their sleeves and start construction. All they needed was time. Drunk Mo's due date was the end of February, and there was less than half a month left. With Ruoqing and Rui by her side, she had been in a good mood. Ever since she started practicing martial arts, her physique had become much stronger than before. With a professional delivery team, she didn't have to worry too much. Fong walked in from outside. Li Yi looked at him, but before he could speak, Fong shook his head and said, "No." He meant that there was no letter from him. Li Xian hadn't replied to him for almost 3 months. Not only Li Xian, but Mingsu and Shanning also didn't reply. The letters he sent out were like stones sinking into the ocean, and there was no reply. No reply, right? He wouldn't write any letters this month either. He would reply when he received his letter. Who's afraid of who, mister? When Li Yi was sitting in the courtyard in a daze, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. This voice was too familiar, so familiar that he could recognize it with his bones. However, he hadn't heard this voice for a long time. Yang Fu wouldn't call him that. In the entire Shuzhou, in the entire Jing kingdom, no one else would call him that. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the girl standing at the door, looking at him in a daze. He suddenly stood up. Because he used too much strength, the stone chair he was sitting on was directly overturned by him. He looked at the girl, turned around, and picked up the stone chair. He sighed and sat down again. He had been looking forward to their reply for the past 2 days. He had actually been hallucinating. How could he be in Shuzhou? How could he see Shou Ning in King Jing's imperial residence? Mr. Crack. Li Yi broke the armrest of the stone chair. He stood up in disbelief and said, "Shanning, you, how could you?" The girl ran over, but stopped halfway. Her eyes were full of tears, but there was a smile on her face. She said, "I missed you, mister, so I came to see you." When she ran over, Li Yi clearly saw the excitement in her eyes. He didn't know why she stopped. He thought for a moment and stretched out his arms. The girl was startled, and then she rushed forward. Li Yi was knocked back a few steps by her. Mister, I'm so happy. She hung on his body like a koala, holding his neck. He didn't know whether she was crying or laughing. He could only hear her vague murmurs. Li Xian walked in quickly from the door. He looked at Li Yi and laughed. You didn't expect this, did you? Shanning hurriedly got down from him, wiped her tears, and stood aside in a very ladylike manner. As Li Xian walked over, he stretched out his arms and said, "Long time no see." Li Yi brushed past him and walked to the door. He said in surprise, "Where's Emingzu? Why didn't Emingzu come?" Chapter 1061. Emingzu. Li Xian was not angry at being ignored at all. A trace of embarrassment appeared on his face as he said, "Emingzu is busy with state affairs and doesn't have time to come over." Li Yi looked at Li Xian. 2 years had passed. Although his appearance and temperament had not changed much, the words he said were not like the Li Xian he knew. As the ruler of a country, he could stroll from the capital to Shuzhou, but he said that Emingzu was busy with state affairs. Was this something he could say as an emperor? Was this something a person could say? Li Yi finally couldn't help but ask, "When did you become so shameless? You flatter me." Li Xian cupped his hands and said, "I only learned half of your skills." Li Xian was being overly modest. "What 5%? It was at least 50%. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Did you say she was busy with state affairs or did she say it herself?" Li Xian glanced at him and didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "If you want to see her so much, why don't you go back to the capital to see her?" This conversation could not continue. Li Yi turned around. If he had time to chat with Li Xian, he might as well see if Shanning had grown taller and fatter. A girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood. After not seeing her for nearly 2 years, although she did not gain weight, she did grow a lot taller. Before, she could not reach his chin, but now she could reach his nose. Xiao Niang. Li Duan ran out of the room and threw himself into Shanning's arms with open arms. Li Xian looked at him and asked, "What did your Li Duan say just now?" "Fragrant." Li Yi thought about it and said, maybe he was talking about the fragrance on her body. Royal sister. She had just put Li Duan down when Yongning pounced on her. Shanning had spent a long time with her. Other than Li Yi, she was the closest person to Yongning in this world. Li Duan and Yongning walked around Shanning. Li Xian looked around and asked, "Can't anyone see me?" Yongning walked over with a red face and said softly, "Imperial brother." When Li Duan saw Li Xian, he quickly ran over. Li Xian squatted down and smiled. "Dwener is still the best." Li Duan ran to Li Xian's side, looked around, and asked in disappointment, "Xiao Rui didn't come?" For an emperor to need to find a sense of presence like this, one couldn't say that no one would do it in the future, but Li Xian was definitely the first. This time, he could be considered to be making a private visit in disguise. In truth, it didn't matter whether he was in disguise or not. There was no difference in the capital without Li Xian. Li Yi also didn't make a big fuss, only informing Qin Chong. In all of Shuzhou, there weren't many people who recognized him. Although the shameless Li Xian had left Emingzu in the capital, and Li Yi was deeply resentful, Shanning had come here, so he had to celebrate. Li Xian, he might as well bring him along. Li Yi just wanted to send Li Xian away, so he looked at him and said, "Don't be so stingy." Fong thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "Here?" "Of course, he's gone far away," Li Yi said snappily. Although that thing was small, it was very powerful. If one was not careful, it would hurt people. It was safer to go far away. Fong thought for a moment, looked at Li Xian, and said, "Come with me." Li Xian followed Fong to a tree in the distance. Seeing him start to untie his belt, he was shocked. "What are you trying to do?" Something fell from Fong's body. Li Xian looked at something on the ground and asked in surprise, "What is this?" Fong looked at the thing on the ground and seemed to understand something. He put on his belt and said proudly, "You haven't seen it before, right? This thing is called the Red Barbarian Cannon. Of course, this is a smaller version, but its power can't be underestimated." Fong picked up a copper tube and a pedestal-like thing and introduced it to Li Xian. "You won't understand even if I explain it to you like this." Li Xian watched as Fong picked up a green brick from the corner and placed it on the ground. Then, he placed the strange thing called the Red Barbarian Cannon on the ground. After fiddling with it for a while, he took out a square box from his pocket. He took out a small stick from the square box and used the tip of the stick to scratch the side of the square box. Whoosh! A ball of flame appeared in Li Xian's eyes. "What is this thing?" Looking at Li Xian's shocked expression, Fong was startled and smiled. "I forgot to tell you. This is called a match. You haven't seen it before, right?" Li Xian really hadn't seen it before. He was the dignified emperor of the Jing Kingdom and the president of the Academy of Sciences. Other than Li Yi, he could be said to be the most knowledgeable person in the Jing Kingdom, but today, he was looked down upon. Not only that, he was looked down upon twice. Just like how he despised those stubborn and rotten scholars, he was actually despised by old Fong, who had never been educated. He suddenly felt that this trip was worth it. Otherwise, he might have missed out on a lot of interesting things. Seeing that Li Xian kept looking at the match in his hand, Fong's mouth pulled into a smile. To be able to despise an emperor made him feel a little accomplished. Li Xian looked at it and suddenly asked, "Is this real fire?" "Of course it is real," Fong said decisively. Li Xian stared at the match in his hand and asked, "Then why don't you feel any pain when your hand is burned?" Li Yi was listening to Shanning talk about her and Emingzu learning martial arts when he heard Fong's shout in the distance. He glanced in that direction. Wasn't it just to show the power of the mini cannon to Li Xian? Li Xian wasn't shocked, so why was he shouting? Chapter 1062. Bang! When Fong used the match to light the fuse, the strange thing he called the Red Barbarian Cannon disappeared in front of Li Xian. At the same time, the blue brick disappeared as well. The blue brick did not disappear, but was directly smashed into pieces. The scattered pieces fell to the side of Li Xian's feet. Fong ran to the bushes to pick up his treasure. Although this thing was small, exquisite, and powerful, the recoil was not small. Every time it was used, it would jump a few feet away by itself. Li Xian picked up a piece of the blue brick and put it under his nose to sniff it. He smelled the smell of God's punishment. Could God's punishment be used like this? The hard blue brick was simply too fragile in front of this little thing. If it was replaced with a human skull, it would not be much different. It was too fast, so fast that he could not see it clearly. This thing was too powerful. Although Li Xian's martial arts were not high, he estimated that even a martial arts master would not be able to defend against this thing. The mini cannon that had just been fired was a little hot. Fong put it aside to cool down, walked over, and asked proudly, "How is it?" Li Xian looked at him and asked, "You just said that this is a smaller version. How big is the one that is not shrunk?" Fong thought about it and gestured a few times. He realized that he could not make a gesture at all. He shook his head and said, "In short, it is very big. You will know when you see it." Li Xian quickly walked to Li Yi's side. His eyes lit up and he said, "Give me one of these things, this is just a decoration. It is not very useful, and it is also dangerous." Li Yi shook his head. The mini cannon was made by him for fun. Although it was powerful, the recoil was too strong. If an ordinary person held it in their hand, one shot would destroy their arm. Even someone as strong as Fong would not be able to handle it. He really did not dare to let Li Xian play with this thing. He also did not intend to let Li Xian study a normal-sized cannon. The Jing kingdom was still in the stage of stable development. They did not attack cities and territories. The Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom were now afraid of them. It was not very useful to have this thing, and God's punishment was enough. Of course, the most important thing was that they were now in the early stage of testing. Although there was a lot of information that could be consulted and used for reference, there was no guarantee that there would not be any mistakes. They had to slowly improve and perfect it. Li Xian sat on the grass and played with the treasure that Fang had just taken out. This thing could be considered a very powerful hidden weapon. Although after listening to Li Yi's explanation, he already understood that this thing had a lot of limitations, it did not matter if it had shortcomings. If there were shortcomings, they could just improve it. This was what the Academy of Science did. Not afraid of difficulties, not afraid of hardships, and daring to make mistakes, these were the basic qualities that a scientific researcher must have. Fang stood beside Li Xian with a vigilant expression on his face. The more interested Li Xian was in this thing, the more uncertain he felt. He was the emperor, and the world was his. If he took a fancy to his treasure, should he give it to him or not? He looked for a while and finally could not help but squat down and said, "Have you seen enough? If you have, give it back to me." Young Fu squatted on the other side and was scaling a fish in his hand. He had just heard the beautiful sister and his sister's martial uncle mention the two words of Li Han. In this world, there were three people he was most afraid of. One was his second brother, another was his sister's martial uncle, and the last one was his sister. Of course, he was afraid of his royal sister because he didn't want his royal sister to be sad. He was afraid of his second royal brother because his second royal brother had killed his father and mother, as well as his eldest royal brother. If he went back, his second royal brother would kill him. He was afraid of his royal sister's martial uncle because he had locked him in a dark room to calculate problems and didn't even give him food, but if he had to say the person he hated the most, it was definitely Li Han. Although he had never seen Li Han and did not even know what he looked like, how good he was at playing marbles, or whether he could urinate as far as he could, but these were not important. What was important was that whether it was Prime Minister Wang or his sister, they always compared him with Li Han, saying how powerful and outstanding Li Han was. In comparison, he, Young Fu, was like an idiot, so he hated Li Han. He did not like anyone or anything related to Li Han. Therefore, when he found out that the beautiful and gentle sister was Li Han's sister, he did not think she was beautiful or gentle. He touched his chest. There was a snake sewn from a piece of cloth. Fat Tiger had lent it to him to play with. They often used this thing to scare girls. Girls were all afraid of snakes, and Li Han's sister was no exception. She looked even prettier than Fat Tiger's sister, Fat Ya, and looked even more gentle than Fat Ya. When she talked to his sister's martial uncle, even her eyes were smiling. She must be more afraid of snakes than Fat Ya. In the past few months, he had already understood that as long as Fat Tiger and the others could do it, he could do it. Using a fake snake to scare girls wouldn't be punished. While Li Han's sister was washing her hands at the stream, Young Fu quietly followed behind and threw the fake snake into the grass at her feet. He pointed at the grass and said loudly, "Snake, there's a snake." Ah! Shaoning had squatted down to wash her hands by the stream, but she seemed to be startled by the sound. She waved her hand randomly in the grass beside her, grabbed something, and threw it out. Young Fu was indeed startled when he saw Li Han's sister. He laughed loudly and caught the fake snake, saying loudly, "Coward, that's fake. Are you talking about this?" Young Fu saw the girl standing by the stream and turned around. She held something in her hand and waved it in front of his eyes. He saw clearly that it was the fake snake he had just thrown. If she was holding the fake snake, then what was the slippery, long, soft, and moving thing in his hand? Li Yi was roasting Shawning's favorite mushrooms when he suddenly heard a scream from the stream. When he turned his head, he saw Yang Fu running over from there, his pants wet. His face was pale, and he shouted as he ran, "Snake, there's a snake!" Yang Fu, who often used fake snakes to scare girls with fat tiger, would actually be scared by snakes. Li Yi shook his head and looked at Shaoning, who was walking over from the stream. He seemed to understand something. After learning martial arts from Emingzu for 2 years, she was no longer the girl who would be scared by things like mice and snakes 2 years ago. Even Yongning was not afraid of these things. He had found the wrong person this time. Shaoning walked over and looked at him with some grievance. She said, "Sir, there was a snake in the grass. I didn't know he was so easily scared. He was so scared by a snake that he peed his pants. Forget it, forget it. It's not the first time he peed his pants." Li Yi waved his hand and handed over the roasted mushrooms. He said, "Try it." "Thank you, sir." She reached out to take it and used chopsticks to feed Li Yi a piece before eating it herself. Not far away, Yang Fu, who had already changed into a pair of pants, looked over with fear in his eyes. She was so beautiful, looked so gentle, and smiled so sweetly. She wasn't afraid of snakes. She actually used snakes to scare him. Her gentleness was fake, and her smile was fake. It was all fake. He finally understood a principle. He couldn't provoke anyone around his royal sister and martial uncle. Shaoning had been by his side for the past few days, and Li Yi hadn't seen Yang Fu for a few days. Of course, it wasn't just Shaoning. Li Xian had also been inseparable from him these past few days. Li Xian had never been to Shuzhou, but he had been heading west from the capital. He knew that the further west he went, the more desolate it was. Only when he reached the westernmost Shuzhou was everything different. Although the construction of the city couldn't be compared to the capital, in terms of commercial prosperity, the current Shuzhou couldn't even be compared to the capital. Other than here, there was no place like the Jing Kingdom, Qi Kingdom, Zhao Kingdom, and Wu Kingdom that allowed free trade like Shuzhou. Chapter 1063. The previous emperor was wise throughout his life, but the biggest mistake he made was to pass the throne to a fellow who was always thinking of pushing the empire away. You should give up on that thought. This was Shuzhou. Li Yi did not have to give him face. He said without any room for negotiation. "Are you going to stay here for the rest of your life?" Li Xian was not angry at all. He looked at him and asked, "Are you not going to return to the capital?" "Not going back." Shuzhou was a beautiful place with beautiful mountains and clear waters. Its geographical location was unique. Why would he go back to the capital? If he went back to the capital, he would encounter all sorts of disgusting things. Li Xian asked again, "Do you want Emingzu to spend the rest of her life alone in the capital?" Li Xian's words were getting more and more hurtful. This was also the reason why Li Yi did not want to bring him along. "Why do you think she doesn't want to come here?" Li Xian glared at him and said, "Even I know that she doesn't want to come here because she is afraid that once she comes here, she will never want to go back." Li Yi could not answer him. "Emingzu even gave you her hair. How dare you say you don't want to go back to the capital?" Li Xian looked at him and shook his head. "You heartless man. Young master, first Miss asked me to call you back to eat." Fong stood on the city wall and looked at them. He did not finish his sentence and turned around to go down the city wall. Li Yi sighed. Li Xian did not understand Emingzu. The Jing Kingdom could not do without her. Li Xian could travel thousands of miles from the capital to Shuzhou because of a sudden thought, but she would not. She could not let go of things that Li Xian could easily let go of. She was more like an emperor than Li Xian. When Li Xian arrived at Shuzhou, he found everything new and interesting. He was even more fascinated by the industrial base in the depths of the fringe. However, Drunk Mo's due date was approaching, and Li Yi had no time to accompany him, so he had to ask Wang Wei to send someone to pick him up. So far, it was still in the early stages, and the more mature ones were probably smelting and forging. As for the chemical industry, he only dabbled in it. Some time ago, he made a match, but it was the most primitive and simple. It was not very safe, and it was still being tested and improved. In a short period of time, it was impossible to put it into production. Fang's box was just for fun. He just wanted to show off in front of Li Xian. Li Xian stayed there for 7 days. When he came back, he was a little different. His reaction was also within Li Yi's expectations. The Academy of Science mainly focused on theoretical research. Improving farming tools, grinding lenses, inventing some ingenious gadgets, making a model of the solar system, and so on. It could only be considered as a small-scale project. She did not know about these things. Old Minister Wang sat back down. He stroked his beard with a blank expression on his face. He felt like he had grasped something, but it also seemed like he had grasped nothing, but in the end, something was quietly growing in his heart. Chapter 1064. Li Yi realized that old man Wang, who was by Yang Liuqing's side, had been asking him more and more frequently. In the past, 90% of the questions he asked were about the difficult problems in the book Elementary Mathematics. Recently, he didn't ask about these anymore. Instead, he asked about some reform matters in the Jing Kingdom. The Jing Kingdom had been carrying out reforms in the past few years. Some succeeded, some failed, but in general, the reforms were still developing in a good direction. Now, the court had found a long-term path that could stabilize the strength of the various classes and improve the lives of the people at the bottom. It was suitable for the development of the Jing Kingdom. It wasn't difficult for other countries to know the specific measures of these reforms. They could send some spies to live in the capital for a year and a half, and they could personally and deeply experience all the changes brought about by the reforms. Of course, old man Wang had been on the run with Yang Liuqing. Every day, he would think about how to avoid the pursuit of the court of the Wu Kingdom and how to restore the dynasty. He didn't have the time or energy to investigate these things. If he was willing to investigate, these were not secrets. Therefore, when Li Yi was free, he wouldn't deliberately avoid this topic. Old man Wang asked a few questions, stroked his beard, and asked, "I heard that other than the East Palace, there is also a West Palace in your country." The West Palace that old man Wang mentioned wasn't referring to the harem in the usual sense, but Mingzhu's morning dew hall. At the beginning of the 5th year of Jinghe, the previous emperor was gravely ill. As the crown prince, Li Xian took charge of the government and entered the Eastern Palace. Although Mingzhu was the assistant, Li Xian's position was only a pretense. All the matters of the court, big or small, were actually all decided by Mingzhu alone. Gradually, no matter if it was the officials of the court or the common people of the capital, they all got used to calling the place she lived in Western Palace. This habit had been used until now. Li Xian devoted himself to scientific research and didn't care about the court affairs. In name, Mingzhu was an assistant, but she exercised the power of the court. Therefore, the name West Palace became even more famous. There was no need to hide this from old man Wang. However, after he heard it, he seemed to be in a trance. He kept muttering, "How can this be, and how can this be?" Then, he left in a daze. Li Yi shook his head. Old man Wang had always wanted to help the Yang Liuqing siblings restore the dynasty, but now, the hope was actually very slim. The old man was already old, and whether or not he could withstand this blow depended on his own willpower. He didn't think about it anymore. Drunk Mo would give birth at the end of this month, or at the beginning of next month at the latest. She was only 16, just a child. Women were always very sensitive to men's gazes. Therefore, when Bai Su noticed that Li Yi had been sizing her up for a long time, she stopped feeding Shaning, turned to look at him, and said, "Your Highness Jiang of Silla, if you're interested, why don't you come up and have a spar? Li Yi shook his head without hesitation. There was no need for a spar. With Bai Su, his image as an idol had long collapsed. She just wanted to take revenge on him for patting her chest and stealing her woman. Bai Su glanced at him with disdain, walked forward, picked up the teapot, and gulped down a few mouthfuls. Li Yi watched her put down the teapot and thought to himself that an expert was indeed an expert. Even drinking tea so boldly, he thought about it and asked curiously, "Miss Bai, you're not young anymore. Haven't you thought of finding someone to start a family with?" Thinking of this, Bai Su's heart was a little angry again, and she glared at him. Li Yi sat a little further away and said, "Don't look at me like that, we're not suitable." Bai Su clenched her fists, and her chest rose and fell a few times. Suddenly, she smiled and asked, "In the Jiang of Silla family, does anyone use lily-flavored perfume?" "No." Li Yi shook his head. Ever since Zuimo got pregnant, no one in the residence, from the master to the servant girls, used perfume. Bai Su suddenly walked forward and gave him a gentle hug. With a smile on her face, she said softly, "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness Jiang of Silla. I will consider what you said carefully." Li Yi was stunned. He just said it casually just now, he didn't expect Bai Su to really consider it. He suddenly felt a little guilty in his heart. From now on, in this world, he was afraid that there would be another man who would suffer. Then he seemed to think of something and looked at her and asked, "What did you say just now? What lily-flavored perfume?" "Nothing, just casually asking." Bai Su smiled, walked into the courtyard, and said to Shaning, "Let's continue." Inexplicable, Li Yi shook his head, stood up, and walked into the courtyard inside. Zuimo should be giving birth in a few days. Rui, Ruoqing, Yangliuqing, and third Miss Chen were all in the courtyard. "Stop." He walked over and said a few words. When he was about to walk back to the study, he was stopped by Rui. Rui walked over and walked to his side. She frowned and murmured, "Lily-flavored perfume." Li Yi was stunned. When he raised his head, he saw 5 pairs of eyes in front of him looking over. It was just like how he wouldn't like Fong or Li Xian. Why was Mississippi Lu so sure that he wouldn't like Bai Su? Was it because she had small breasts? "Because you don't like small breasts." Rui's words made it seem as if he had some discrimination against women with small breasts. Although there was a reason for this, it only accounted for 80%. She was narrow-minded, cunning, and unfeminine, which accounted for the remaining 20%. As drunk Mo's due date approached, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became tense. Even Li Duan was much quieter than before. Several times, he ran over to ask him and Rui if second mother was going to give birth to a younger brother or sister. The professionally trained delivery team was preparing 24 hours a day and resting in shifts. When Xiaozue ran over and said that drunk Mo was about to give birth, the tense atmosphere in the prince's mansion reached its peak. Rui held his hand tightly. She was even more nervous than when she gave birth to her own child. Li Yi wanted to go in to accompany her, but Rui's attitude was very firm. She said that it was unlucky for a man to enter the delivery room, but drunk Mo didn't agree. Li Yi could only be superstitious. He didn't dare not to be superstitious. It was already a mystery that he could appear in this world. If he questioned the existence of gods at this time, who knew if he would be punished? After a long time, a midwife opened the door and came out. She smiled and said, "Congratulations, Prince. It's a little princess. Both mother and daughter are safe. Reward." Li Yi breathed a sigh of relief and strode into the room. Yesterday was a joyous day in the prince's mansion. All the maids and servants were rewarded with a year's salary. All the servants who had worked in the prince's mansion knew that the prince was very generous to the servants. The salary they received was definitely not the number written on the surface. It was often more than 10 times or even dozens of times higher. It was said that the first midwife who came out yesterday to report that she was safe received a reward of 1,000 taels of silver. She was so excited that she fainted on the spot. When would the third madam be pregnant, and when would the princess be pregnant again? It was really something to look forward to. Before one became a father, one would never understand what it was like to be a father. The eldest daughter of the Li family fell asleep. Lying next to drunk Mo, Li Duan stood by the bed with his hands behind his back, watching without blinking. He had a younger sister, and there would be someone to play with him in the future. Father said that he was the eldest brother, and he had to protect his younger sister in the future. As a man, he understood this even without father saying it. When his little sister grew up, he would be able to bring his little sister to play on the slide, swing, and buy her candied fruits and candied fruits. Chapter 1066. Li Yi wondered if it was in a woman's nature to forget her husband after giving birth. It was like this when Rui gave birth to Li Duan, and it was the same after Zui Mo gave birth to Li Mu. The young princess of the Li family, Li Mu, was now the apple of everyone's eye. At home, she was much more popular than Li Duan and himself. Li Duan wanted to learn Kung Fu from Mississippi Liu, so Mississippi Liu handed him over to Yang Liuqing for the time being. He swore to protect his sister, so he had to practice Kung Fu with tears in his eyes. Fortunately, although it was hard, he persevered. Li Duan was already 3.5 years old, so it would be good for him in the future if he could train his body a little. Women in confinement needed special care, so Li Yi had not been idle these days. He had taken into consideration both nutrition and taste. He had put in a lot of effort. Li Xian had been in the land of chaos, and he had sent a letter saying that he would be back tomorrow. This also meant that they would not stay in Shuzhou for long, and they would be returning to the capital. Although one less Li Xian in the capital was not a big deal, he was still the emperor. Even if he could not stay in the capital, he could not always wander outside. So, Shanning had been in low spirits since yesterday. Li Yi thought for a long time, then looked at her and said, "If he doesn't want to go back, let him go alone." Shanning raised her head and smiled. She said, "Gathering and parting. When there is gathering, there will be parting, and when there is parting, there will be reunion. Parting is for a better reunion. There is mother, sister, and many things to do in the capital. I can't always be outside." Li Yi did not speak anymore. Shanning lowered her head and was silent for a while. Then she ran to the side, picked up a branch, and drew crisscross lines on the ground. She said, "Sir, let's play chess, beast chess." Beast chess was the first game that Li Yi taught her, and it was also the first game that she knew. It was taught by Li Yi to her, and after she carried it forward, it quickly became popular in the capital, especially among young children. She played very slowly and methodically. This made it difficult for Li Yi to use ultimate moves such as Little Dumbo, Tigger, and the universe's invincible celestial hound. Fortunately, he won and lost this time, and the probability of winning and losing was between 50 and 50. This made him even more sad. He knew that in chess, he would never have a chance to surpass Shanning in his life. He could not believe that she could actually win and lose one game, and she could not win one game more. As the game went on, even Bai Su, who was standing behind, saw it and looked at him with slight contempt. So the game of chess could not go on. He looked at the time, and it was almost time to prepare dinner. These days, Drunk Ink's food was taken care of by him alone, including the ingredients, and he personally went to the market to pick the freshest. Shanning carried a small cloth bag and followed behind him, just like a little attendant. These days, except for sleeping and very few times, she would hardly leave his side more than 5 steps. If it were not for Bai Su also following behind, this must have been a flawless day. Su seemed to have made a breakthrough recently. Li Yi had not seen him for several days, but it did not matter. He just went out to buy vegetables, and he did not need a guru to escort him every time. What's more, although Bai Su had a small chest, a small butt, a small heart, and a lot of shortcomings, her advantages were also very obvious. Eighth on the heaven list, she was definitely a qualified bodyguard. With Fang, in Yong County, she could almost do whatever she wanted. Coincidentally, they met Yang Fu and the others on the street. The old man with the surname Wang, Yang Fu, and a few guards, walked slowly on the street, talking to Yang Fu as they walked. In the past, old man Wang often asked him some questions, or talked about some things about the Jing kingdom. Later, for unknown reasons, he rarely came. Instead, when he was talking to Yang Fu about the way of the emperor, the latter often fell asleep on the table. Li Yi could understand Yang Fu, because the prime minister's voice had a unique charm, even he wanted to sleep when he heard it. Your Highness Jiang of Silla. The old man with the surname Wang also saw him, and cupped his hands to salute him. Li Yi looked at him. Prime Minister, this is... The old man with the surname Wang cupped his hands and said, Shuzhou used to be the poorest and most chaotic place in the Jing kingdom, but in just 2 years, it has become so prosperous and rich. This old man brought His Highness King Jing out to have a look, hoping that Your Highness can learn something from it. Li Yi looked at Yang Fu, and found that his eyes were staring at the fruit-candied haws on the street stalls, and there was a look of longing in his eyes. He felt that old man Wang was still a little too hasty. So what if he learned it? The reason why Shuzhou had become the Shuzhou it was now was not only because of its unique geographical advantage, but also because it was his territory, and he could do whatever he wanted. The Wu kingdom was still in someone else's hands. Even if Yang Fu learned it, it would be in vain. Li Yi bought a fruit-candied haw for Shanning and Yang Fu, and the longing and envy on Yang Fu's face disappeared. Just as he was about to wave goodbye to them, a group of carriages slowly drove over from afar. The man in the lead looked left and right, and suddenly walked over. He asked the old man with the surname Wang, May I ask, old man, how do I get to the Yong County government? The old man didn't answer, but looked at him and asked, Are you from the Wu kingdom? Dodge. The man held the windmill with a kind smile on his face. However, when his hand was halfway through, a trace of viciousness quickly appeared on his face. His speed suddenly increased, and from the gap between his index and middle fingers, a bit of blue light shone out. If we fail again this time, His Majesty will not let us off. A guard looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said, Prepare 2 fast horses for us and send us to the Qi kingdom. Otherwise, I will kill King Jing right now. The old man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he said angrily, How dare you? The man sneered and said, I'm going to die either way. It's worth it if I can drag King Jing down with me before I die. Yang Fu's face was already pale and bloodless. He shouted, No, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Prime Minister, give them horses, give them horses. The old man surnamed Wang looked at Li Yi. Li Yi looked in Yang Fu's direction. That knife was on his neck and there was already a trace of blood. With just a light cut, Yang Luqing would have to rebel and become the empress. After thinking about it carefully, Li Yi hurriedly suppressed this immoral idea. He looked at the old man surnamed Wang and lightly shook his head. Shaking his head meant that it was too dangerous. If they weren't careful, they would have to let their princess become the empress, so he agreed to their conditions for the time being. The old man surnamed Wang clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, Fine, I promise you, don't hurt King Jing. Wait a moment. The guard looked left and right, then suddenly opened his mouth and said. He pointed at Shanning, who was protected by Bai Su, and said, Let her come over. The old man surnamed Wang was startled. Li Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. Yang Fu, who had the knife on his neck, seemed to see a glimmer of hope. He shouted, Yes, she is the princess of the Jing kingdom. She is more important than me, she is more important than me. Just tie her up. Let me go, let me go. The old man surnamed Wang's body swayed. He looked at Yang Fu as if he was looking at a stranger. His lips trembled, but he couldn't say a word. If it weren't for this little princess, King Jing would have been dead. How could he say such a thing? His body also began to tremble. His eyes dimmed and his face was ashen. The guard had just said it casually. He could only see that the girl was of noble status, but he didn't expect her to be so noble. If he tied her up, wouldn't their chances of escaping be greater? He pointed at Shanning again and said loudly, "Let her come over, or I will kill King Jing right now. If we die together. Then let's kill her." Li Yi walked over and took Shanning's hand. He said, "Let's go home. If we go home late, the fish won't be fresh." It was because the fish purchased by the residents wasn't fresh that he and Shanning came out to buy live fish. If the fish were dead, they would have to come out to buy it again. He looked back at Fong and said, "Don't forget to have someone clean the floor later." The two guards looked at him with a stunned and shocked expression. "Then kill him." This was King Jing, not some random cat or dog. How could he just kill him? Chapter 1068. Li Yi didn't expect Bai Su, who could only be considered half a woman, to care about her figure. He generously told her the secret recipe of the breast enhancement soup. He didn't have to worry that the effect wouldn't make her angrier. After all, this was personally tested by Emingsu. Bai Su wasn't even as good as Emingsu in the past, so the effect would definitely be more obvious. No matter how stingy this woman was, after drinking his soup, she wouldn't stab him with a dart, right? Shanning's ankle was really sprained, but it wasn't too serious. Rui took a look and massaged her for a while. She told her that as long as she had a good rest, she would recover in 3 to 5 days. Who would have thought that after Rui warned her for a while, she couldn't help but get out of bed? As a result, she tripped at the door and sprained her ankle even more seriously. This time, it wouldn't be a matter of 3 to 5 days. She would have to rest in bed for at least a month to ensure that she would recover to the same state as before she was injured and not leave any future problems. As her injury worsened, she seemed to be even happier. When Li Yi walked out of her room, he actually heard her humming a tune. Young Fu had already taken a shower and used a lot of soap. There wasn't a trace of the stench on his body anymore. There wasn't a single guard in the room, so he felt more at ease. He was afraid of guards now. Prime Minister Wang stood in the middle of the hall. There was a brown stain on his body that emitted a foul smell. The smell made Yang Fu want to vomit, but he couldn't vomit because it was the smell he got when the Prime Minister carried him back after he had lost control of his bladder. He still hadn't recovered from today's events. He had nearly died when the man had handed him the windmill. When the guard had put his sword to his throat, he had nearly died. He touched his neck. There was a blood stain on it, and it still hurt a little when he touched it. If the knife was a little sharper, his head wouldn't be on his neck anymore. Fortunately, everything was over. That man actually let those two traitors kill him. When his imperial sister returned, he must tell her about this. "Your Highness." The old man surnamed Wang ignored the stench on his body and took a few steps forward. Prime Minister." Yang Fu raised his head and looked at him. He didn't know why, but although the Prime Minister was very calm at this moment, he felt that the Prime Minister was very scary, very scary. Prime Minister Wang walked in front of Yang Fu and slowly sat down. He asked, "Your Highness, do you still remember the way of the Emperor that I taught you?" I remember everything." Yang Fu was overjoyed and immediately said, "To be an emperor, one man is the heavens. With great power in hand, one must judge the situation, make the best use of everything, make the best use of people, have a broad heart to accommodate the world, and have a broad mind to accommodate all rivers. As an emperor, there is no need for him to be knowledgeable. He may not be able to compose good poems or write beautiful essays, but he must have the spirit of an emperor." He secretly rejoiced that he had memorized this part. Who knew that Prime Minister Wang would test him at this time? The old man nodded and asked, "Does your highness know what the spirit of an emperor is?" Yang Fu was startled. He then shook his head and said, The Prime Minister didn't teach me." The old man thought about it and let out a long sigh. He slowly said, "I indeed didn't teach you. But your highness must remember that some things don't need to be taught. If you don't teach me, how would I?" Yang Fu secretly muttered in his heart, but his face revealed an enlightened expression. He said, "Yang Fu will definitely follow the Prime Minister's teachings and learn the way of the Emperor." The old man shook his head and said, "Your highness doesn't need to learn these things in the future, really?" Yang Fu raised his eyebrows and was overjoyed. The way of the Emperor was too long for him to memorize. It would be best if he didn't have to learn it in the future. Your highness doesn't need to complete your daily homework in the future. Do whatever you want to do. The old man waved his hand and didn't look at Yang Fu again. He turned around and left. Yang Fu was still standing there in a daze. In the future, he didn't need to learn anything and could do whatever he wanted. This was supposed to be a happy thing, but why did he feel a chill in his heart? Yang Liuqing quickly walked into the courtyard and hurriedly asked, "Is the Prime Minister and Yang Fu okay?" She only heard that Prime Minister Wang and Yang Fu were assassinated outside today, so she hurried back. Wei Liang, who was waiting here, immediately said, "Your Highness, the Prime Minister and King Jing are fine." Yang Liuqing asked, "Where are they?" "King Jing is in his room." Wei Liang said, "The Prime Minister is also in his room." The Prime Minister said that if your Highness comes back, please go and see him first. Yang Liuqing nodded and quickly walked to a courtyard. She knocked on the door. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room. "Come in." Yang Liuqing pushed the door and entered. Prime Minister Wang was standing in the room. He was wearing an official robe and a high crown. He knelt down in front of her and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor." "I'm sorry, Your Highness." Yang Liuqing was shocked and hurried forward to help him up. She said, "Yang Fu is not injured." "Prime Minister, you don't have to blame yourself, I'm not referring to today's assassination." The old man with the surname Wang shook his head and said, "Before the former emperor passed away, he entrusted King Jing to me. He hoped that I could set things right and support King Jing as the emperor. But I'm afraid that I can't fulfill the former emperor's last wish." Yang Liuqing's face turned pale. She looked at him and asked in a trembling voice, "Prime Minister, what do you mean?" The old man looked at her and asked, "Your Highness, do you know what happened today?" Yang Liuqing shook her head. "That little princess saved him. If it wasn't for that little princess of the Jing kingdom, would King Jing still be alive?" The old man with the surname Wang closed his eyes and said in a sorrowful voice, "But what is he doing? He wants to exchange his savior's life for his own. Such a heartless person, who is worse than a beast, what right does he have to sit on that throne?" He knelt down again. Tears streamed down his face. He said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor entrusted me. I didn't teach him well." Yang Liuqing stood there in a daze. She couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. Her father and brother were killed. Her mother was forced to commit suicide. They had been on the run, gathered their forces, and gradually fought back. They only had one goal. They wanted to suppress Emperor Wu, who killed his brother and father. They wanted to support the former emperor's son, King Jing, as the emperor. Giving up on King Jing meant giving up on themselves. Without this reason, they were traitors and plotting a rebellion. It made a big difference to them whether King Jing became the emperor or not. However, as Prime Minister Wang said, Yang Fu, he didn't deserve to be the emperor. "That's good." After a long silence, a smile of relief finally appeared on her face. She helped Prime Minister Wang up and said, "Let General Wei and General Chen dismiss those officers and soldiers." Let them divide the rest of the money. I've always made a mistake. In fact, Your Highness has also made this mistake. The old man shook his head and said, King Jing is only King Jing. He can't represent anyone except himself. He can't represent the officers and soldiers, and he can't represent the world. Yang Liuqing was startled and looked at him. The old man knelt down again and kowtowed to Yang Liuqing 3 times. When he raised his head, his expression was solemn. He said in a loud voice, I beg Your Highness, for the sake of the former emperor's last wish, for the sake of the people of the Wu Kingdom, to suppress the traitors, to ascend the throne. Chapter 1069. Suppress the rebels and ascend the throne as the emperor. Yang Liuqing looked at Prime Minister Wang, who had a solemn expression on his face. His lips parted and he said with difficulty, How is this possible? Why is it not possible? Prime Minister Wang raised his head and looked at her with bright eyes. He asked, Your Highness has been in the Jing Kingdom for a long time. Do you know the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom? Yang Liuqing nodded subconsciously. The eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom, Li Emingzu, was unparalleled in beauty and martial arts. She also had the ability to govern the country. She was close friends with her martial uncle. She was her master's strong rival in love. Prime Minister Wang gritted his teeth and said, Since the Jing Kingdom has a princess in charge, why can't our Wu Kingdom have an empress? But, Prime Minister Wang looked at her and continued to ask, Your Highness, do you think that we can still pin our hopes on Imperial Prince Jing? Yang Liuqing shook her head. If that's the case. Prime Minister Wang kowtowed again and said loudly, This old official sincerely requests Your Highness to ascend the throne. The door was pushed open with great force and 2 figures walked in quickly. Wei Liang knelt down on one knee, raised his head, and said loudly, This official sincerely requests Your Highness to ascend the throne. Chen Qing knelt down next to Wei Liang and said respectfully, This official sincerely requests Your Highness to ascend the throne. Yang Liuqing looked at their solemn expressions and couldn't help but take a few steps back. A certain sturdy wall in his heart seemed to be shaken at this moment. Li Yi used the extremely sharp dagger that Mississippi Liu gave him to make a crutch for Shawning. If she really had to lie in bed for a month, she would probably die of boredom. In order to stay here for a longer period of time, she purposely sprained her ankle and worsened her injury. Li Yi was angry and distressed. She wanted to find a suitable reason to stay. Why did she need to do this? When Li Xian came back tomorrow, she could pretend to break his leg by accident and let him stay here for a year or so. Wouldn't that be simpler and more effective? Fong walked in from outside and said, Son-in-law, those guys were still stubborn at first, pretending to be tough guys. Later on, after a little torture, they were all released. The so-called tough guy was only relatively speaking. Fong's a little bit of torture was definitely not as simple as he said. However, this was no longer important. He polished the edges and corners of his walking stick and casually asked, Were they sent by the Emperor of the Wu Kingdom? Yes and no. Fong shook his head. After thinking for a moment, he said, They are not merchants of the Wu Kingdom. They are all killers. The heads of Princess Duan Rong and Prince Jing are worth 100,000 taels of silver each. Someone sent an invitation to the martial arts world of the Wu Kingdom. If anyone can catch Princess Duan Rong and that bastard Yang Fu, no matter whether they are dead or alive, they will offer 200,000 taels of silver with both hands. 200,000 taels of silver as a reward for 2 people was undoubtedly a big deal. The one who had such a deep hatred for them and wanted them dead the most was the Emperor of the Wu Kingdom. To be exact, Yang Liuqing had a deep hatred for him. He was just worried that they would threaten his throne. Fong continued to say, The 2 of them are currently the highest on the bounty list. They should have been targeted by many killers. A month ago, someone spread the news that they are in Shuzhou. As for the 2 guards, they may be spies of the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom. They have been hiding around them for a long time. This time, they should want to take advantage of them. However, I didn't expect that woman. Seeing Bai Su coming out of Shanning's room, Fong glanced at her and continued to say, I didn't expect Bai Su to be so good at martial arts. Her skill in using concealed weapons is even superb and exquisite. It is rare in the human world and hard to find in the heavens. In short, Miss Yang and the others have been targeted by many people. If they go out alone, they should be extra careful. After Fong finished speaking, Yang Liuqing walked in from outside with Yang Fu. Kneel down. When she walked up to Li Yi, she glanced at Yang Fu, who had his head lowered, and said coldly. Plop. Although Yang Fu was full of reluctance, he still knelt in front of Li Yi. Yang Liuqing looked at Li Yi with an extremely complicated expression. After a long time, he slowly said, Yang Fu is ungrateful and did such a thing. It's all because I didn't discipline him well. Please punish me, martial uncle. You are you, and he is he. Li Yi waved his hand and said, You have been secretly offered a bounty in the Wu Kingdom. The bounty is 100,000 taels of silver for each of you. There should be countless people targeting you. When you go out, be more careful. In addition, I don't know if there are spies of the imperial court among your people. It's better to thoroughly investigate them. Don't let today's incident happen again. I understand. Yang Liuqing nodded, glanced at Yang Fu, and said, Yang Fu, you go and kneel outside. Yang Fu didn't dare to disobey him, so he knelt outside. When the maids and servants passed by him, they couldn't help pointing at him. This is the King Jing of the Wu Kingdom, he's still a prince. He's ungrateful and returns kindness with enmity. At such a young age, his heart is already so vicious. When he grows up, Yang Liuqing didn't say how long he wanted Yang Fu to kneel, but he only knelt for less than 10 hours before he fainted. It was unknown whether he was embarrassed or kneeling. A person's bad nature was completely revealed in this 14-year-old child. If he wasn't a child, or if he wasn't Yang Liuqing's younger brother, Li Yi would let him know the price of doing wrong and saying wrong things. However, he didn't have the slightest interest in Yang Fu. This child was already useless. Whether they wanted to live in seclusion in the countryside or wanted to continue to rebel and support Yang Fu as the emperor, it had nothing to do with him. He had to look after Shanning. He was worried that she hadn't recovered from her foot injury and would jump out of bed again. In the afternoon, Old Man Wang came to find him. At that time, he was massaging Shanning's sprained foot. She was giggling because of the itch. The massage technique was taught to him by Bai Su. She said that she didn't want to owe others a favor. In the martial arts world, it's not a burden to have more skills. Looking at the horoscope to predict one's luck, relaxing the muscles and blood, massaging to set the bones, rebellion. These skills, it was better to learn one more. Who knew when it would come in handy? Old Man Wang knocked on the door and stood at the door. He asked, Your Highness Jiang of Silla, can I have a word with you? Shanning smiled every time she massaged her foot. Li Yi had long wanted to run away from the door. Those who didn't know would think that he was abducting an ignorant girl inside. Li Yi walked into the courtyard and sat beside the stone table. Old Man Wang sat opposite him. Your Highness Jiang of Silla and the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom, Li Emingzu, must be very close, right? Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang. He didn't know what he meant by this question. He waved his hand and said modestly, just as so. Old Man Wang looked at him and asked, Then what does Jiang of Silla think about Princess Duanrong compared to the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom? Li Yi thought for a while and shook his head regretfully. In terms of appearance, at this level, there was actually no difference between them. It could only be said that each had their own merits. Emingzu was the domineering empress type. Although Yang Liuqing was a princess, she was the pretty daughter of a humble family. Their identities were not much different. in terms of martial arts, they were far apart. In terms of breasts, they were not far apart in the past, but now they were far apart. In general, they were still not as good as Emingsu. Old man Wang seemed to agree with his conclusion and nodded. His eyes were slightly dim as he said, "The eldest princess of the Jing kingdom is a genius." "Your Highness is indeed not as good as her." Li Yi was a little puzzled. For no reason, why did old man Wang compare Yang Liuqing and Emingsu? He wasn't as free as him. He still had to boil bone soup for Shanning to nourish her body. He stood up and said, "Prime Minister Wang, if there is nothing else, I will leave first." "The soup is still boiling in the pot." Prime Minister Wang raised his head and suddenly looked at him. "I'll lend you the Red Barbarian Cannon and give you a 20% discount on the new weapons." Li Xian quickly calmed down. The war between the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom and the Zhao Kingdom had just subsided for less than 2 years. They were still at the stage of stabilizing the national economy. It was impossible for them to wipe out the Wu Kingdom for no reason. Even if Li Xian agreed, the courtiers would not agree. Li Xian had nowhere to vent his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'll go and see how the old man's writing is going. Meditate and reflect on one's own mistakes. Don't talk about other people's wrongs while chatting." This ancient saying was very good. Don't speak ill of others behind their backs. Because old man Wang spoke ill of Li Xian behind his back, he was taken down by 2 imperial consecrators on the spot. The 2 consecrators were older than him, and there was no such thing as respecting the old and loving the young. Li Xian did not make things difficult for him. He just locked him in his room and made him write a 5,000-word reflection. The content of the reflection was to praise him, saying that he was wise and mighty, indomitable, talented and good-looking, and a famous ruler throughout the ages. Li Yi felt that old man Wang, as the prime minister, should not lack a 5,000-word vocabulary. If Li Xian did not vent his anger on him, it should not be a problem for him to double the number of words. As it turned out, Li Xian did not do things in such a low-end way. He only made old man Wang read what he had written with great emotion. According to an imperial guard who did not want to be named, the old man fell down before he finished half of the content. When he fell down, he vomited and had diarrhea. It was extremely miserable. Li Yi had not seen old man Wang for 3 days, and it had also been 3 days since he saw Yang Fu. In these 3 days, Yang Liuqing did chores such as cleaning the courtyard and drying the clothes as usual. She was more like a servant girl of the Li family than a princess. She never talked much. She just buried herself in her work and had little communication with Rui. Until the morning of the 3rd day, the weather was sunny and the breeze was gentle. Li Yi came out to bask in the sun with Shanning in his arms and played chess with her casually. Rui stood behind him and watched the game. Many times, she expressed her disdain for his loss to Shanning. Rui, Ruoqing and 3rd Miss Chen took turns to take Li Mu from Zui Mo's hands and walked around the yard with her in their arms. A little further away, Yang Liuqing was helping Li Duan correct his movements. Under her guidance, Li Duan had been able to play a complete set of boxing. Of course, his fist technique only had the form, it did not have any power. Compared with Shanning, Li Yi's chess skills seemed very bad, or even no chess skills at all. So it made Mississippi Lu have the illusion that she could also beat him. Chapter 1071. Mississippi Lu's disciple did not belong here. Li Yi had long known that this day would come. Her injuries had healed a long time ago, and her martial arts had also improved. These days, she had never mentioned a certain matter, but it did not mean that she had let it go or forgotten it. In her eyes, there was the great hatred of her parents and brothers, as well as the people of the Wu Kingdom. She could let it go for a while, but she could not let it go forever. Mississippi Lu held a chess piece in her hand, and after a moment of silence, she asked, "When are you leaving?" Yang Liuqing lowered his head and said, tomorrow. Mississippi Lu put down the chess piece and said, got it. Master, martial uncle, I will leave first. She lowered her head and fell silent. After a long time, she said in a low voice and turned to leave. When she reached the gate of the courtyard, her footsteps paused. With this step, she would be in two completely different worlds, two completely different lives. Unfortunately, she had no other choice. She looked back again, turned her head, and strode out. This game of chess was not finished, because the players were not in the mood. Li Yi was a bit conflicted. He had never expressed any intention of helping Yang Liuqing. First, it was because what she wanted to do was too important and risky, and it required a great investment of money. If he helped her with all his strength, even he could not afford it. Second, it was because fundamentally speaking, he was not helping Yang Liuqing, but Yang Fu. Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, his own martial nephew. Who was Yang Fu? But now it was different. From a sociological point of view, Yang Fu was already a dead man. He could not appear in front of the people of the Wu Kingdom again. For the rest of his life, he could only choose to be an ordinary person. And if he was not in a hurry, he did not need to use the red barbarian cannon to blast his way through. He could take the dog head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom within 3 months and take the simple and violent route. In fact, the rebellion could be done slowly. He only needed to provide some strategic support and weapon support to help her mobilize the strength of the people of the Wu Kingdom, unite the front, and advance step by step. To be honest, it had always been a regret in his heart that Emingzu did not sit on the throne. However, since things had come to this, he could not possibly rebel against Li Xian. Now, there was a great opportunity in front of him. If he missed it, it would be a pity. After all, if he missed this opportunity, he wouldn't get another one. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu, thought for a moment, and said, this is her choice. Mississippi Lu stood up and walked back to her room. Li Yi sighed. He knew that Rui was conflicted. On one hand, she wanted to help her only disciple, but on the other hand, she had to think about everyone else. She would no longer act on impulse or passion. He carried Shanning back to the room, walked out again, and sat back in his original position. He pondered for a long time, but still couldn't make a decision. What's wrong? Are your hands itching? Li Xian walked in from outside and sat opposite him. He looked at him and asked with interest. Li Yi glanced at him. What do you mean itching my hands? Stop pretending. Li Xian looked at him and said, I know. Your precious disciple nephew will be leaving tomorrow. Li Yi needed to correct a mistake. Yang Liuqing was Mississippi Lu's precious disciple, and his disciple nephew. There was no need to add any attribution in front of the name, disciple nephew. He looked at Li Xian and said, she has her mission. Do you think that everyone is like you, not doing a proper job, and being muddle-headed and lazy in politics, keep pretending? Li Xian crossed his arms and looked at him as if he had seen through everything. He said, I don't believe that you are not tempted by her. Li Yi looked back. Rui and the others had entered the room, and Mississippi Lu was not outside. He then looked back at Li Xian with a slightly angry expression. Although we are very familiar with each other, don't talk nonsense. Do you think I don't know you? Li Xian waved his hand and said, don't think that I don't know. You wanted Emingzu to be the empress, but that incident happened and the plan failed. I know that you must have regrets in your heart. You want Emingzu to be the empress, and you want your second daughter to be the empress. He looked at Li Yi and suddenly asked, tell me honestly, do you have any special fetish? Do you especially like empress, queen, and princess? Emingzu, Shanning, Yang Liuqing, Yongning. You must have this fetish. Li Xian looked at him and continued, this time, it was personally suggested by that old man. I don't believe that you will miss this rare opportunity. Slander, naked slander. The reason why he was conflicted was because he did not want his martial nephew, his own martial nephew, to die for nothing. He also did not want Mississippi Lu to fight for Zhongtian or not. It might become a lifetime of regret in the future. Li Xian, that son of a bitch, what was in his head? Not to mention Emingzu, Shaning is still a child. Yang Liuqing is his martial nephew. Yongning is his younger sister, despicable, shameless. Li pointed at him and said angrily, get out of my sight right now. Don't, are you angry because of this? Li Xian shook his head and said, this is not a secret. We still have many spies in the Wu Kingdom. If you need them, you can call them. Li Duan stood beside Li Yi, pulled his sleeve, and asked, Father, where is senior sister going? If the Li family was compared to a sect, then Rui, and him should be the first generation, and now there were also Ruoqing and Zuemo. Yang Liuqing was Rui's disciple, and counted as the second generation. Chapter 1072. Yang Liuqing's footsteps paused, but she did not turn her head. You are going to die like this, Li shook his head and said, isn't it just a rebellion? It's not a big deal. Uncle Master will help you. Yang Liuqing's body trembled slightly. All these years, she had only shed tears twice when her father and brother had been killed, and when her mother had committed suicide, and when she had reunited with her master. She had brought Yang Fu with her when they had been chased by the imperial court. She had not cried when they had been on the run. She had not cried when they had fought their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood when they had been defeated by the imperial court. But at this moment, because of Li Yi's words, she had instantly burst into tears. She wiped her tears, and when she turned her head, her face was already smiling. She shook her head and said, Uncle Master, I appreciate your kindness, but these are my niece's family matters. Please do not interfere. Li looked at her and asked, do you know what the first rule of our sect is? Yang Liuqing shook her head and said in a low voice, we do not have a sect, and we do not have rules. Now we do. Li looked at her and said, the first rule of our sect is to be obedient. Uncle Master, Li gently patted her head, as if he was patting Li Duan, and said, be good, be obedient, Uncle Master. If you do not listen, you will be punished according to the sect rules. She looked at Li Yi's solemn expression, opened her mouth, and did not say another word. However, the tears in her eyes that she had been holding back rolled down uncontrollably, sliding down her face. At first, it was only one or two, but then it became a string. She squatted on the ground and hugged her knees. Although she was still trying hard to hold back, she could not help but cry out. Li Yi was most afraid of girls crying. When Zumo cried, he could hug her and comfort her gently, but the person in front of him was his martial nephew. When Yang Liuqing cried, he didn't even know where to put his hands. Especially when Mississippi Lu heard the noise and walked into the room. She stood at the door and saw Yang Liuqing squatting on the floor, hugging his knees and crying. When she looked at him again, he didn't know what to do. Yang Liuqing cried for a while before she stopped. She stood up straight, her face slightly red. Li thought of what she had just said and asked curiously, what did you say just now? What happened between your master and me? Mississippi Lu glared at him, then at Yang Liuqing, and pulled her away. Li Yi was a little confused. He wasn't the one who had made her precious disciple cry. He couldn't help her, but he couldn't help her either. He was in a bad spot. It was normal for girls to be sentimental. There was nothing shameful about crying, not to mention in front of him and Rui. Old man Wang would be greatly embarrassed. Because he didn't want to see anyone, he had long hidden in the carriage, waiting to leave. But now that he was not in a hurry to leave, he had to get off the carriage and walk back under everyone's gaze. Even the servant girls of the Li family knew that the old man beside Miss Yang liked to talk behind people's backs. He was so old that he still pooped his pants. Old man Wang had replaced Yang Fu and become the man of the hour. As early as a few days ago, Yang Fu had been sent to the mountains. He would spend a very long time on one of the mountains in the land of chaos. Chen Qing had personally led people to the Wu kingdom to spread the news that the former emperor's legitimate son, King Jing, had been assassinated by Emperor Wu's men and died early. This just happened to confirm an old saying. Some people were alive, but they were already dead. Rebellion had never been a simple thing. Rebellion also had to pay attention to basic laws and core values. Li Yi played it down when he said it, but when he really carried it out, he had to be very careful with every step he took. Fortunately, he had a lot of useful information to search for and countless historical experiences to learn from. He didn't even have to tailor it for them. There were thousands of ways to rebel, and there would always be one that suited them. Moreover, she wasn't rebelling. She was also the legitimate heir of the Wu kingdom. What she wanted to do was to set things right. In fact, compared to Mingzhu, it was even easier for her to ascend to the supreme position. Mingzhu's real identity was a princess, and she was the real princess royal of the Wu kingdom. She had a very high prestige among the people of the Wu kingdom. According to Old Man Wang, they also had some old subordinates of the former dynasty who were deeply hidden in the imperial court. Before the official rebellion, Li Yi naturally had to understand these things first. This time, he didn't intend to use too much power. Wang Wei and the others would be enough to manage the fringe well. Other than a few experts, the Lu League didn't need to move into the Wu kingdom on a large scale. Their power was never the deciding factor, and they were also not Yang Liuqing's biggest reliance. Historical experience told him that the more ferocious the enemy was and the more difficult the environment was, the more it was necessary to mobilize the power of the people, Uncle Master. A figure came from behind and sat beside him. Yang Liuqing was silent for a moment. Then, he said softly, "Uncle Master, I don't want to take revenge anymore." Li Yi turned to look at her. She thought for a moment and said, "Once we start the rebellion, many people will die, many innocent people." Li Yi knew that deep in her heart, she still didn't want to be a burden to him and Rui. But in reality, he didn't want to be a burden either. The expression on his face became even more doubtful. "Forget it, these are not important." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "In short, you have to remember to take back your father's country and become the emperor yourself." You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.